April 13th, 1944. Somewhere in the North Atlantic, 112 meters beneath the surface, the kind of depth where sunlight doesn't reach and silence presses against your skin like cold steel. They say the ocean is quiet, peaceful even, but they've never heard it from the inside of a submarine with the engines cut and every man on board holding his breath. That day, I didn't just hear the sea. I heard its weight. I felt it above us, around us, waiting, like a predator circling something wounded. It started as a routine patrol, nothing dramatic. 3 days out, chart a path near the Bay of Biscay, collect sonar data, head home. We'd done it before. Enough times that it became mechanical. You eat, you listen, you record, and you sleep between layers of humming machinery. But the ocean has its own way of humbling even the most seasoned sailor. And it doesn't send warnings, only silence. I remember the moment the tension shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of one. The engine room, usually alive with vibration and rhythm, went still, not stopped, just paused. You could feel it in your spine, like the whole submarine had taken a breath and decided not to let it out. That's when we knew we weren't alone. The sonar technician, a kid from Ohio who still had braces, glanced over his shoulder. Didn't say a word. He didn't have to. On the green glow screen, we saw it. A contact, faint, close. Probably a German destroyer, maybe two. No time to surface, no time to fight. We dove deeper. There's something about descending in a submarine that never stops feeling unnatural. Every creak of the hull is a reminder. You're inside a pressurized coffin, one small error away from being crushed like a soda can under a boot. At 100 meters, the metal starts to whisper. At 112, it groans. But we didn't stop. Inside, the temperature dropped. Moisture began to form on the pipes and walls. Not dripping, just clinging, like sweat from the lungs of the ship. Some men wiped their faces with rags. Others just stared forward, pretending to be statues. Fear manifests differently for everyone. Mine was quiet. My hands were steady, but my teeth were locked shut, as if opening my mouth might let the pressure in. The commander moved down the corridor like a shadow. No raised voice, no panic. Just eyes scanning every corner, making sure we were silent, truly silent. That kind of silence isn't just about noise. It's about intention. No clanking, no radios, no breathing too loud, because in the deep, every vibration becomes a target. I sat near the battery room across from a man named Keller. Big guy. Used to play football back home in Pennsylvania. I'd seen him throw a wrench through a steel bulkhead once when the engine jammed, but that day, his eyes were glass. He held a photo of his kid in one hand. I didn't know he had a kid until then. Funny what you learn about men when they think they're going to die. Above us, we could hear the faint thump of propellers. Slow, deliberate. The destroyer knew we were there. It was listening too. We were part of a deadly game now, one where patience meant survival. A single misstep would send depth charges raining down on us like iron fists from the sky. There's a kind of time that only exists in submarines. It doesn't follow minutes or hours. It lives in heartbeats, in the slow drip of condensation off a rusted valve, in the rhythm of a man trying not to panic. A second stretches into eternity, and eternity tastes like metal and fear. One of the younger crewmen, Davis, muttered something under his breath. I don't think he realized he'd spoken aloud until the commander turned his head. Just a glance. That was all it took. Davis froze. You learn discipline fast when your life depends on the silence of 50 men. By the second hour, we had cut every unnecessary system, even the fans. The air got thick, warm. Breathing felt like drinking steam. I could feel my shirt sticking to my back, soaked in sweat. The battery smell mixed with oil and metal until it felt like we were inhaling the submarine itself. We became part of it, living organs inside a dying beast. No one spoke. Not really. The only sounds were the occasional crack of expanding metal or the distant echo of the enemy ship repositioning. Someone dropped a wrench. A stupid mistake. It clanged once, then rolled. A few of us flinched. The commander didn't even look. He just closed his eyes and pressed a hand to the wall, listening, waiting. That kind of waiting. It eats at you. It starts with your body. The aches in your legs, the cramps from staying still too long. Then it goes after your mind. You start to imagine things. The sound of water dripping that isn't there. The sudden certainty that the hull has cracked, that someone up top has already launched a charge and it's on its way down. I started counting, not for any real reason, just numbers in my head. 1, 2, 3, over and over. It wasn't about tracking time. It was about control, holding on to something real when everything else felt like it was slipping. I later learned half the crew was doing the same thing, counting, breathing, praying. We were trapped together in the dark, but each man was on his own island of fear, and still the enemy waited. If you're still with me, I want you to stop and think about something. How long can you hold your breath? 15 seconds? 30? A minute? Now imagine holding your entire life in silence. Every heartbeat, every twitch, every thought, silent. Not for seconds, but for hours. That's what it means to be hunted beneath the sea. That moment in time, that suspension of life, it doesn't leave you. I'm an old man now. I've seen battles. I've seen the face of war, but nothing compares to the feeling of being buried alive, knowing that your grave is made of steel, and the only thing keeping it from becoming permanent is your ability to vanish into nothing. I tell this story not for glory, but for memory, because too many stories like this are already forgotten, and those of us who lived them, we're disappearing too. If you believe these memories matter, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to help us preserve these stories before time swallows them whole. The first explosion didn't sound like you'd expect. It wasn't thunder or fire or some cinematic eruption. It was dull, a deep underwater thump that rattled your bones more than your ears. It felt like the ocean itself had just clenched its fist and slammed it into the hull. Everyone flinched, not dramatically, just a small twitch, the kind that happens when instinct overtakes discipline. Then came the second one, louder, closer. The floor shuddered beneath us, dust drifted from the ceiling, and that's when I felt it. That invisible, primal certainty that we were officially under attack. There's something terrifying about being hunted in a place where you cannot run. On land, you can take cover. In the air, you can eject. But in a submarine, you are already buried. The only thing between you and the crushing weight of the sea is a thin skin of steel and the hope that someone above doesn't guess your exact position. We had been detected. That much was clear. The destroyer circling above had locked in. Maybe it had caught a trace of engine noise before we cut them. Maybe the sound of the dropped wrench. Or maybe they were just smart enough to know this part of the Atlantic was a graveyard in waiting. And they were there to start digging. The charges came in waves. You don't see them. You don't even really hear them the way you would hear a bomb in a movie. But you feel them. You feel the pressure shift in your chest. You feel your ribs rattle inside you. You feel the air being sucked out of the room for a fraction of a second. Each one sent a pulse through the ship, like a heartbeat, but not ours. The heartbeat of something angry trying to kill you. They were using depth charges, canisters packed with explosives that were calibrated to detonate at certain depths. They didn't need to hit us directly. They just needed to get close enough. The shock wave would do the rest, bend the hull, crack a seam, rattle a gasket loose. One good hit, and seawater would rush in with a violence no man could stop. We had no control. That is the worst part. The waiting, not the noise, not the shaking, the waiting. Knowing there is someone above you pulling levers, pressing buttons, dropping bombs, and you can do nothing but sit and count the seconds between explosions. I remember gripping the side of the bunk, not out of fear, just to anchor myself. The sound of metal moaning is something you never forget. The pressure on the hull was immense. At 112 meters, every square inch of the submarine was being pushed inward by over 160 pounds of force. That means the entire boat was under a crushing pressure of hundreds of tons. And still, we stayed quiet. The commander had ordered all hands to remain silent. No unnecessary movements. Even whispering was discouraged. We had already shut down the engines, the air recyclers, everything we could afford to stop. The lights were dim. The temperature had risen. Sweat ran down faces, necks, backs, but no one moved. No one spoke. Every few minutes, another explosion would boom in the distance, some closer, some farther. The destroyer was walking us. That's what we called it, walking the charges closer and closer, based on guesswork and sonar. They were trying to herd us into a corner, trap us, force us to make a mistake. It was a psychological war more than a physical one. They were above us, in open air, daylight, breathing fresh wind. We were buried in darkness, humidity, and recycled breath. I could hear the breathing of the man beside me, Keller again, the football player. His knuckles were white from gripping the pipe above his head. His lips were moving, not in prayer, just mouthing the same sentence over and over. Something about his son. I didn't interrupt. That sentence might have been the only thing keeping him sane. After the 7th charge, I remember feeling something shift in my chest. Not pain, not panic. Something more primal, like a piece of me had broken off and started watching from the outside. It's hard to describe. You stop feeling fear after a certain point, not because you're brave, but because fear requires hope. And when that's gone, you become something else, something colder. Somewhere around the 10th explosion, a pipe started to leak in the aft section. Nothing major, just a few drops. But in the silence, it sounded like a drum. Drip, drip, drip. It was a reminder. The ocean was always there, pushing, pounding, waiting for a way in. Men tried to sleep. Some leaned against bulkheads and closed their eyes, but no one really slept. Your body may rest, but your ears never stop listening. Each creak, each thud, each shift in pressure, they all became part of the language of survival. You didn't need alarms, you just felt it. The chef, of all people, was the one who held it together best. He started peeling a potato with a pocket knife, just sitting there on an overturned crate, calm as anything. He didn't say a word, didn't look at anyone, just peeled, one strip at a time, slow, steady. That knife against the skin of the potato was the only rhythm in the room. I don't know if it comforted us or made us more nervous, but no one told him to stop. We couldn't fight back. Submarines weren't designed for combat at that depth. Our torpedo tubes were useless unless we surfaced, and surfacing was suicide. So we waited and prayed the men above would give up before the hull gave out, and they didn't stop. The 11th charge was the closest yet. The lights flickered. A panel popped open near the electrical bay. Sparks sputtered and died. A man near the rear vomited quietly into his sleeve. No one moved to help. He didn't expect them to. We were no longer 57 men. We were one organism, each of us a cell. Our job was to stay alive long enough for the whole to survive. Ego had evaporated. Rank had dissolved. You stopped caring about your title. All that mattered was silence, stillness, and the tiny chance that maybe, just maybe, they would stop looking. If you're watching this and wondering what it really feels like to be inside a war machine that's become a trap, think of this. Imagine being locked in a steel room the size of a bus. Now, place that room underwater, in darkness, with no escape route. Add the knowledge that someone is outside trying to crush you with invisible fists. And then, just wait. That's the war they don't show you. That's the part no medal ever mentions. If this story helps you see what war really feels like, take a moment to comment. Tell us what you felt. Share it with someone who thinks courage is always loud. And if you want to help keep these memories alive, subscribe, not for numbers, but for legacy. After the last depth charge faded into the silence, something far more dangerous took its place. The ocean didn't need to explode to kill us. All it had to do was wait. The hours dragged forward without sound, without movement, without certainty. What came next wasn't made of metal or fire. It was made of air, or rather, the slow and quiet disappearance of it. At first, it was barely noticeable. The kind of thing you could write off as fatigue, breathing a little harder, a slight pressure behind the eyes. But slowly, steadily, the atmosphere inside the submarine began to shift. The CO2 levels were rising. The oxygen was falling. We all knew what that meant. The enemy was no longer above us. It was inside the very air we breathed. On paper, a submarine like ours could stay submerged for close to 48 hours without surfacing for fresh air. But that's under perfect conditions. Our conditions were far from perfect. We had already shut down systems to minimize noise, which meant limited ventilation. Every breath recycled a little less effectively than the one before. By the 30-hour mark, the change became physical. Our heads were pounding. Some men had nosebleeds. The air grew thicker, like breathing through a damp cloth. I remember reaching up and touching the wall beside me. It was slick with moisture, not water, just condensation, dripping slowly from the metal, like the boat itself was sweating. One of the officers handed out salt tablets. Another passed around a bottle cap filled with iodine drops to put in our drinking water. It was all protocol, but it felt like ritual, like we were preparing not to survive, but to endure. A few of the younger men started to hyperventilate. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, just a gradual rising panic in their chests. You could see it in their eyes, wide, unfocused, staring past the bulkheads, past the metal, past the air, as if trying to see the surface, that distant sun they might never feel again. Someone tried to joke. I don't remember what he said. Something about canned beans and coffin air. No one laughed. Humor dies fast when there is no room left for it. The temperature continued to rise. Without ventilation, the heat from our own bodies became a trap. The submarine turned into a low and slow oven, not hot enough to burn, just hot enough to press down on your shoulders and make your lungs ache. Breathing became a conscious act. Inhale, pause, exhale, wait. The worst part wasn't the heat, it wasn't the air, it was the silence that followed. A kind of silence that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth, not even in the deepest woods or the loneliest desert. This was a silence of pressure, of shared suffocation, of knowing that if one man screamed, it might break something we could never put back together. I tried to sleep at some point just to pass the time, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My brain wouldn't shut off. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I could feel the weight of the air pressing against my chest like a lead blanket. I turned on my side, curled up against the hull, and stared at a tiny crack in the paint. Someone had scratched initials there, probably from a mission before mine, probably from someone who also thought they might not see the sky again. There is a moment when the air becomes scarce that you start to see things. It isn't madness exactly, more like a peeling away of what is real. I saw flashes of my mother's porch, the way the wood creaked in the summer. I saw my dog chasing fireflies. I saw the street lamp outside my old school flickering like it used to when we walked home late. It all felt so real I could touch it. And then it was gone, replaced again by the wet walls and the dying air. The medical officer came around with ammonia sticks. The sharp sting was supposed to wake up the brain, shock the system into alertness. It worked, barely. But every time I inhaled one of those, it made me think of what was really happening to our lungs, the slow poisoning of our own breath. By hour 36, we were using emergency air scrubbers, big canisters filled with lithium hydroxide, designed to pull CO2 from the air. But even those had limits. They bought us time, not safety. Every minute we stayed submerged was a gamble, and we were running out of chips. I started counting again, not for survival, just for sanity. My brain needed rhythm, structure, something to grab onto. 1, 2, 3, over and over. Sometimes I'd count to 50, sometimes 200. It didn't matter. The numbers weren't about progress, they were about control, about pretending that I still had some say in whether my lungs would keep working. Around the 40th hour, someone passed out. A crewman named Elkins. He had been sitting in the torpedo room, barely moving, when he slumped over. No one shouted. No one panicked. A medic dragged him out quietly, fanned him with a manual, gave him oxygen from a tank that was only supposed to be used in real emergencies. I remember thinking, if that doesn't qualify, what does? Our commander never flinched. He paced once every hour, just a slow walk from one end of the sub to the other. No words, just presence. He didn't ask how we were. He didn't give false hope. He just walked, nodded, moved on. That was enough. What people don't realize is that leadership isn't about speeches in moments like that. It's about calm, stillness, about being the one man who does not give in to the weight pressing down on everyone else. By hour 48, a few of the men began muttering to themselves. Nothing dangerous, just fragments, pieces of conversations from a life above the water, a mother's voice, a song lyric, a dog's name. It was haunting, but no one stopped them. It was better than screaming. Every breath was heavier than the last. The taste of the air turned bitter, metallic. The filters were failing. I felt it in my mouth, like breathing through rust. I remember staring at the pressure gauge and wondering which would kill us first, the depth, the air, or the waiting. In that place, time stops being time. It becomes something else, a pressure of its own, not measured in minutes, but in how long you can hold on to yourself before you unravel. And still, we stayed quiet, still, invisible. If this story made you feel something real, let it be known. Leave a comment. Remind someone that war is not just bullets and flags. Sometimes it is the slow, invisible battle against your own breath. And if you believe these stories matter, subscribe. Not because we need numbers, but because these voices deserve not to vanish. There is a moment deep inside a steel coffin buried under the sea when silence stops being a shield and starts becoming a test. Not a test of endurance, not even of courage, but of identity, of self. When the air has turned sour and the lights flicker and the metal groans like a dying animal, you start to wonder not if you will die, but who you'll be if you live through it. By the end of the second day, we had stopped speaking entirely, not by order, just by instinct. Every breath was measured, every movement was rationed. Words had become expensive, silence was cheaper, safer, more reliable. What bound us together was not hope, it was stillness. We became a single organism, 57 men functioning on the edge of collapse, held together by the thin thread of shared fear, not fear of death. We had made peace with that, but fear of losing ourselves before the ocean claimed us. There was a man named Harrington, engineer, quiet type, kept to himself during normal operations. We all respected him, mostly because he never complained. On the third day, I saw him sitting on the floor near the ballast panel, hands folded in his lap, eyes open but not seeing. He wasn't asleep, he wasn't unconscious, he was just gone. His body was there, his breath was there, but the man, the actual man, was somewhere else entirely. No one touched him. No one tried to pull him back. We just let him sit there, frozen in that liminal space between awareness and surrender. I remember thinking maybe that was his way of surviving, disconnecting, slipping into a space where the pressure could not follow. And then there was Davis, youngest on the crew, barely 20. He'd grown up in Montana and talked about horses more than submarines, always sketching something in a notebook, even during drills. On hour 54, he started humming, just barely, a melody none of us recognized. At first, we thought he was losing it, but then we realized he was humming to calm himself, a coping mechanism, a small rebellion against the silence. The strange thing was, it worked, not because the tune was pleasant, but because it was human. It reminded us that the world above still existed, that music still existed, that something soft could live inside something so hard. One of the senior officers tapped him on the shoulder and shook his head gently. Davis stopped humming, but none of us were angry. In fact, for those few seconds, I think we all felt a little less alone. You learn quickly that not every man breaks the same way. Some snap all at once, like glass under pressure. Others erode slowly, piece by piece. A joke that turns bitter, a story that doesn't finish, a stare that lingers too long on nothing. Keller, the big guy from Pennsylvania, started pacing. Not fast, not erratic, just back and forth along a 6-foot stretch near the galley. He counted each step under his breath. 6 steps, turn, 6 steps back, over and over, for hours. Someone tried to stop him once. He shrugged them off, said it was the only way to keep the walls from moving. None of us argued. There was something sacred about the way each man found his method. Some prayed, some wrote, some stared into the dark. Each action was a form of survival, of pushing back against the crushing sameness of the moment. Because that's what wears you down. Not the fear, not the danger, but the sheer monotony of helplessness, the unchanging now. Food became mechanical. Cold rations passed hand to hand in silence. No one cared about taste anymore. We chewed because we had to, because it gave our hands something to do, our jaws something to move, a reason, however small, to keep the machine of our bodies from shutting down. Sleep was worse. Dreams, when they came, were cruel. They were filled with surface things, sunlight, wind, the smell of grass. One man woke up crying, not because of terror, but because he had dreamt of coffee, fresh hot coffee on a porch with birds chirping. And when he opened his eyes and smelled battery acid and mildew instead, the loss of that illusion hit harder than anything we'd felt in days. One evening, or what we assumed was evening, the medic moved through the crew with wet towels. He pressed them gently against our necks, our faces, our foreheads, not because it would cool us down, but because it made us feel seen, touched. It reminded us that we were still alive, still human. It was the kindest thing I'd felt in that steel tomb. Some men prayed out loud, but not in words we understood, just murmurs, a rhythm, a heartbeat made of sound. It wasn't about God, it was about memory. It was about holding on to something that didn't smell like rust. The commander, still silent, placed a hand on the shoulder of one of the mechanics who had curled up by the diesel engine and shut his eyes tight. No words, just the weight of a palm, a grounding gesture. And the mechanic didn't flinch, didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, as if to say, "I'm still here." There were no heroes in that moment, no grand speeches, no defiance, only presence. Only men who chose to keep existing in the face of everything trying to make them vanish. When I think back on those hours, I don't remember pain, or heat, or even fear. I remember the way we kept choosing each other, quietly, patiently, through glances, through small acts, through silence shared like a blanket. And I realize now that survival was never about oxygen or pressure gauges. It was about will, the will to stay, to not slip away, to not become the man staring blankly at the floor or pacing in his own private loop. It was about staying visible, even in the dark. If this story found something in you, let it live a little longer. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let your voice echo in the silence we carried. And if you believe these stories should not disappear with time, hit that subscribe button. Not out of habit, but out of remembrance. We were trapped in a machine built for war, but not built for this. Submarines are designed to strike fast, vanish, and return. They are not sanctuaries. They are not meant for long-term survival in silence and darkness. The USS Tang was one of the Navy's newest and proudest underwater weapons. Streamlined hull, twin propellers, equipped with 10 torpedo tubes and a top speed of 23 knots on the surface. She was beautiful, efficient, dangerous, but like every war machine, she was only as strong as the men who ran her. And right then, those men were falling apart. The systems on board were holding together by threads. After 2.5 days submerged, every hour we stayed down felt like a betrayal of the ship's intended design. The Fairbanks Morse diesel engines had long gone cold. We were on battery power, alone, silent, vulnerable, and our batteries were nearing the red. The electric motors hummed so faintly you could barely hear them. They weren't moving us. They were keeping the basic systems alive, just enough to light a few bulbs, just enough to keep water from claiming us completely. But if we pushed them too hard, if we demanded more than they could give, they'd overheat or fail entirely. And if that happened, it was game over. In the control room, the engineers sat like monks in a chapel, watching gauges with a reverence you'd expect in a temple. Every needle, every flicker of a red light was a sermon, a warning, a prayer. I watched one of them, Petty Officer Sandoval, trace a finger down a checklist so worn it looked like it had been passed down from father to son. It wasn't just paper. It was ritual, a lifeline. We stopped using mechanical tools unless absolutely necessary. Even the sound of a wrench clicking against a bolt was considered too risky. Every repair had to be done by hand, slowly, with fabric wrapped around metal to soften the sound. It turned grown men into surgeons, into ghosts. There was a leak in one of the auxiliary pumps near the stern. It wasn't critical yet, but it was steady. 3 drops every minute. We tracked it with a tin cup and a piece of chalk, marked each hour to monitor the rate. It was like counting seconds on a time bomb. You could see the tension on the crew's faces every time that cup was emptied and filled again. The ventilation system, even on low cycle, made a soft clicking sound every few seconds. We all knew that click. And when it skipped, when it went just a moment too long without sound, our hearts stopped. Because that sound, that tiny mechanical whisper, meant we were still breathing. When it disappeared, it meant the machine was beginning to suffocate, and so we listened. We listened the way animals listen to a storm building far away. We trained ourselves to hear not just sound, but absence. The absence of life inside a machine that had become our only protection. The men in the engine room performed miracles no one outside the Navy would ever understand. Do you know what it takes to recalibrate a ballast valve in complete silence while sweating through your uniform, half delusional from CO2 buildup? Do you know what it means to have to crawl inside a crawl space no wider than your shoulders, carrying a flashlight with dying batteries, just to tighten a bolt that's vibrating loose with every shift of pressure? They did that, over and over. Chief Donovan, the oldest man on board, crawled through the battery racks on his stomach to replace a fuse with a piece of copper wire and duct tape. He didn't ask, he just did it. No gloves, no light. And when he came back out, his hands were bleeding. No complaints, just a nod to the officer in charge and a sip of lukewarm water from a steel cup. That is what saved us. Not the steel hull, not the radar, not the sonar. It was the quiet dignity of men who refused to let the machine die. You could smell it in the air, not just the sweat or the oil or the slow decay of recycled oxygen. You could smell the desperation of a living ship and the devotion of its crew to keep it breathing. The USS Tang groaned under the pressure, but she held, because we held her. Every bolt was tightened by a shaking hand. Every circuit was cooled by a breath we could barely afford to exhale. Every alarm was silenced before it could betray us. There is no glory in that kind of work. No medals for the man who stopped a cooling fan from shorting out. No parade for the sailor who tightened a bolt in silence. But in the belly of that ship, under layers of steel and water and fear, that was where the real heroism lived. I still remember the hum of the emergency air scrubbing unit. It was a low, steady thrum, barely audible, like the purr of a tired cat. We took turns sitting next to it, not to fix anything, just to hear it, because that sound meant we were still alive. When the lithium hydroxide filters began to clog, we had to open them by hand. Dangerous, messy, but necessary. The white powder inside would burn if you touched it too long, but we touched it anyway, because breathing meant pain, and pain meant we were still here. That's the reality of submarines. They are not just steel and wire. They are living, groaning, imperfect creatures. They need care, and when they are sick, they do not cry out. They whisper, and only the ones who truly know them can hear the difference. We heard everything. The cracking of a pipe joint under pressure, the drip of condensation forming into tiny puddles near the floor, the distant thud of our own heartbeat echoing off the walls, the soft creak of a bulkhead adjusting to the weight of the ocean. We felt the presence of the Tang not as passengers, but as organs inside a shared body, and if one organ failed, the rest would follow. So we worked, in silence, in heat, in darkness, not because we were ordered to, but because we had accepted the truth. If the machine lived, we might live. If it failed, we were already dead. If this part of the story made you feel something you didn't expect, if you could see those men, hands bleeding and backs aching, keeping a dying ship alive with nothing but willpower and silence, then take a second. Leave a comment. Let someone know you heard them. And if you want these forgotten acts of quiet bravery to be remembered, subscribe, not for clicks, but for history. No one spoke the moment the decision was made. The commander simply gave a look to the navigation officer, a slow nod, and that was it. After nearly 72 hours buried in a steel tomb, we were going to surface. We all knew what that meant. It wasn't a celebration. It wasn't even relief. It was risk, because surfacing didn't mean we were safe. It meant exposing ourselves. It meant noise, movement, vulnerability. The sea above was still a hunting ground. The destroyers might still be circling, silent and patient. They could be gone, or they could be waiting for this exact moment. We didn't know, but we couldn't stay submerged anymore. The air was thick as oil. The scrubbers were on their last legs. The batteries were barely holding voltage. Men were fading fast. A few had stopped responding entirely. We were running out of time. So we began to rise. It was not like in the movies. There were no sudden surges, no dramatic roars. The ascent was slow, methodical, precise. Rising too fast could collapse compartments or cause structural failure. Our trim tanks were adjusted gently. Valves opened with the smallest hiss. The ship didn't want to move. It groaned like an old man waking from a nightmare, but it moved. I could feel it in my bones before I saw it on the gauges. A slight change in pressure, the way my ears popped, a loosening in my chest that I didn't even realize had been there. We were rising, not to victory, not to glory, just to air. That was all we wanted. The climb took nearly 20 minutes, long enough to count every second, long enough to second-guess whether this was a mistake, but we had no choice. We were gambling with our lives, and the pot was everything we had left. As we reached periscope depth, the room held its breath. The commander raised the scope slowly, rotated it in silence. One full turn, another. No shadows on the surface, no sign of enemy ships, no aircraft, nothing, just waves and sky. We were clear. The call came short and low. Prepare to surface. I was in the aft section when it happened. The ballast tanks blew. Compressed air rushed through the lines. The submarine shook once, hard, then lifted, like a breath being released. We broke the surface in silence. No cheers, no words, just that shift in gravity. That impossible sensation of being in motion and stillness at the same time. The first hatch creaked open, and for a moment, no one moved. Then a crewman climbed the ladder and poked his head out. He didn't say a word, just stood there, blinking in the light. When he came back down, he was crying. We surfaced at dawn. The horizon was painted in soft gold and pale blue, the kind of light that makes you question whether you're alive or just dreaming. I stepped out into it slowly, my hands still shaking. The wind hit me like a whisper, not hard, not loud, just real. It was real. After 3 days of recycled air and darkness, even the breeze felt sacred. The ocean around us was calm, no ships, no smoke, just water stretching in every direction like an endless mirror. The sky was clear. I tilted my head back and looked straight up, and I swear it felt like I could fall into it. Some of the men dropped to their knees on the deck, not from drama, from exhaustion. The sun warmed our faces. Salt air filled our lungs. For a few minutes, we were animals again, breathing, blinking, remembering how to be alive. One of the cooks, Jenkins, let out a laugh. It wasn't loud. It cracked in the middle, but it was enough. Others joined. Laughter that didn't sound like joy, but like release, like a muscle finally unclenching after days of being clenched tight. I remember running my hand along the edge of the conning tower, feeling the metal heat under the morning sun. It had been cold for so long that warmth felt alien. I stood there, fingers resting on rusted bolts, and realized I hadn't seen my own shadow in almost 3 days. The medic was passing out canteens, real water, not rationed sips. I drank mine so fast it hurt, and it was the best pain I've ever felt. A few crewmen started wiping down the equipment topside, just habits kicking in. You could see them trying to remember routine, muscle memory taking over. We were sailors again, not survivors. But it wasn't just the air or the light that brought us back. It was the noise, the wind, the waves slapping against the hull, the gentle creak of the ship on the surface. It reminded us that we were back in a world with motion, with sound, with life. That morning, someone pulled out a harmonica. I didn't know we even had one on board. He played a few broken notes, off-key, breath shaky, but it didn't matter. It sounded like heaven, a melody lost and ragged, rising above the water. For the first time in days, I smiled, but there was something else beneath it all, something no one said out loud. We had made it to the surface, yes, but not all of us came back the same. I looked around at the faces I knew so well, and I saw the weight in their eyes. We had escaped the ocean, but it had left its mark, quietly, permanently. We didn't cheer, we didn't sing, we didn't speak of what happened below, but we carried it, in our silence, in the way we moved, in the way we looked at the sky like it might not be there next time. Even now, all these years later, when I step into sunlight after a storm, I still take a long breath, still feel that first morning air in my lungs, still remember the sound of water breaking above my head, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I still tilt my head back and stare into the sky like I did that morning. Because once you've surfaced after thinking you never would, the world above never looks quite the same again. If you felt something real listening to this story, take a moment to leave a comment. Let these memories echo somewhere outside my head. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit subscribe. Not because it is expected, but because some voices are worth keeping alive. We made it back to the harbor 3 days later. The sky was a little grayer, the sea a little calmer. We stood on the deck in formation, uniforms wrinkled, eyes hollow, skin pale from days without sunlight. When we pulled into port, there were no bands, no cheers, no brass lining the docks, just a handful of officers and a clipboard, and that was enough. They asked no questions. We gave no details, just brief nods, salutes, paperwork. The Navy had a way of recording everything and understanding nothing. To them, we had completed our patrol. Mission accomplished. But we knew better. Some of the crew went straight to the showers. Others wandered toward the mess hall in silence. I remember walking past the barracks and hearing the faint echo of a radio playing a swing tune, something cheerful, something from a different world. I stopped and stared at it for a long time, not because I liked the song, but because it felt impossible that the world had kept moving while we were stuck down there. There were no mandatory debriefings, no medical evaluations worth mentioning. In those days, the idea of psychological recovery was just a footnote in the margins of a manual. If you came back with all your limbs, they assumed you were whole. But war doesn't leave wounds only where you can see them. Over the weeks that followed, I watched us all change. Elkins, the one who passed out near the torpedo bay, wouldn't go near confined spaces anymore. Even elevators made him sweat. He was honorably discharged a few months later. I heard he moved to Arizona, wide open land, dry air, said he could finally breathe out there. Davis, the kid with the humming, stopped drawing altogether. His notebook that used to be filled with sketches was suddenly blank, page after page of emptiness. He tried to re-qualify for another patrol. They passed him. But when the next dive came, he never showed. Just left a note on his bunk that said he was going home. I don't think anyone blamed him. Keller, our big, tough Pennsylvania linebacker, stayed in the service, quietly, did his job, but his laugh was gone. And once, I saw him at the dockside chapel, just sitting there alone in the back row, staring at nothing. A man built for strength, suddenly learning how fragile silence can make you. Even the commander changed. A man made of steel before the patrol, he moved a little slower after. His eyes were heavier, his words softer. I once asked him if he ever thought about those hours down below. He didn't answer, just looked at the horizon and said, "I still hear the hull creak sometimes when I'm trying to sleep." As for me, I returned to normal life, or tried to. I married, had kids, found a job that didn't involve anything louder than a typewriter. But the ocean never left me. Not really. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and feel that pressure again, the silence, the stillness. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, not from fear, but from memory. I stopped riding elevators for a while, avoided long tunnels, crowded rooms, anything that reminded me of the submarine's tight corridors. Even the smell of oil would bring something back, a flicker, a heartbeat from the past, and yet none of us talked about it, not with our families, not with each other. The unspoken rule was simple. What happened in the deep stayed in the deep. Because once you said it out loud, it became real, and some truths are too heavy to carry twice. Years later, I visited a naval museum with my son. He was about 12 at the time. There was a decommissioned submarine there, open for tours. Families climbed through it with wide eyes and cameras. I stood at the hatch, staring down into the narrow ladder. I wanted to go in. I really did, but my legs locked, my chest tightened, and before I knew it, I was back there again. 72 hours. No sun, no voice, no end. My son tugged at my sleeve, asked if I was okay. I just smiled and told him, maybe next time. We walked away in silence. I think part of me stayed inside that submarine, not in the steel or the wires or the control panels, but in the silence, in the weight. In that moment where I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel the sun again, there's a strange kind of guilt that comes with surviving something like that, not because you did anything wrong, but because you know what it cost to walk away. You know what the ocean demanded from you, and you know it will never give back what it took. But in a way, it made us more human, more aware, more grateful for small things. The sound of wind in the trees, the smell of fresh bread, the way sunlight filters through window blinds, the things you miss when you're counting each breath in the dark. Some memories fade, others become part of you. The submarine is part of me. The silence is part of me. And I carry both, not as burdens, but as reminders. reminders of how fragile we are, and how strong we can be when we have no other choice. If any part of this story has made its way into your heart, take a moment to leave a comment. Let the silence we endured find an echo. And if you believe some stories should live beyond the men who lived them, subscribe, not out of routine, but out of respect. The older I get, the quieter the memories become, not because they fade, but because they settle. They rest in the corners of my mind like dust in an old house, undisturbed but always present. And every now and then something stirs them, a sound, a smell, a silence. And just like that, I am back in the belly of that submarine, back in the dark, back in the pressure, back in the pause between who I was and who I became. You don't walk away from something like that untouched. It lives in your blood, in the rhythm of your breathing, in the way your eyes scan a room without you realizing, in the way you sit in silence just a few seconds longer than most. It becomes part of how you see the world, clearer, heavier, more honest. I often think about how young we all were, barely men, full of fire and noise, dropped into the depths where neither could survive. We learned quickly that war is not all action and glory. Sometimes it is stillness, it is waiting, it is being very small in a very large, uncaring place and deciding not to break. In the end, survival was not about strength or training or technology. It was about will. It was about faith, not in God necessarily, but in each other, in the idea that if we stayed calm, stayed connected, stayed present, we might have a chance. And we did. But not all of us came back. You see, the men who stood on that dock when we returned were not the same men who had left. Something stayed down there, a piece of us, maybe the part that laughed too easily, or trusted too quickly, or slept too soundly. It didn't feel like loss at the time, it felt like trade. We gave a little of ourselves to the sea in exchange for another sunrise. That was a bargain we were willing to make. And truthfully, I don't regret it, because I saw what most people never will. I saw what silence can do to a man, what pressure can do. And I saw what resilience really looks like. It isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't march. It endures. It holds fast. It breathes through pain. It moves forward when the world is trying to crush you from all sides. I've told this story not for sympathy, not for recognition, but so it won't be forgotten. Because stories like this don't make headlines. They don't end up in history books, but they matter. Because they remind us of what war costs, not just in lives, but in pieces of soul. So if you've listened all the way through, if you felt even a fraction of what we felt down there, I want to thank you. Thank you for honoring the silence. Thank you for letting these memories breathe again. And thank you for remembering the kind of courage that has no medals. To those we lost down there, whether in body or in spirit, your silence was not in vain. You are remembered. You are carried. You are still here in the quiet spaces between the words. And to you, listening now, take this story with you. Let it remind you of what people are capable of. Let it live in your chest when you face your own dark waters. And if it moved you, share it. Tell someone. Let it echo. Leave a comment if you feel like speaking. Let your thoughts breathe in the space we once held with fear. And if you want to help keep stories like this alive, hit subscribe. Not for numbers, not for fame, but because memory matters. There is one last thing I'll ask. When this video ends and the next one pops up on your screen, click it. Keep listening. Keep remembering. Because somewhere, someone else is still trying to surface from their own deep place. And maybe, just maybe, your presence can help them rise. Thank you for staying with me. Until next time, keep the light on.